The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program. It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
On today's episode of the Share Podcast, Shane, who recently celebrates 10 years clean, takes us through his unbelievable story of cocaine abuse. Shane starts experimenting with alcohol at age 12 and graduates to snorting cocaine and Ritalin during college. After graduation at the age of 22, he moves to Seattle, Washington to find his first job. When the job does not pan out, Shane reunites with his old college buddy to launch an online e-commerce site that eventually takes him to Costa Rica. For the next 2 years, Shane's cocaine addiction spirals out of control. He crashes a motorcycle loaded on cocaine, gets robbed at knife point on a weekend trip to Colombia, and soaks a bath towel in blood from an uncontrollable nosebleed before he finally hits bottom. Out of sheer desperation, Shane's partners make the decision to reach out to his mother. She immediately calls Shane's uncle, a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor with over 20 years clean. That intervention saves his life. It's a story you don't want to miss. Join us now. Hi, Shane. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, O. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show today. How you feeling?
It's been a whirlwind this morning, but I'm good.
What happened?
No, it's just with the kids and trying to get everything fed and clothed and chased down, and it's like you do things 3 times before you can get out of here. Oh, my God. It's all good, though.
All right, you ready to get started?
I am, yeah. Let's get going here.
Excellent. Let's dive right in. Tell us about your life today, your hobbies, what you do for a living. Take us into your normal daily routine, including recovery.
Okay. Luckily for me today, my life is pretty routine. I have a wonderful life today. My last day drinking was about 10 years ago on November 29th, 2004. I'm now married of 4 years with a wife named Marcella, who I met here in Costa Rica. We now have 2 daughters, one that is around about 2.5 years old now, named Clea, and another one that's right around 7 months, named Mila. I attend on an average between 2 to 3, maybe 4 meetings a week. I found a purpose in life, which is this program, and, my kids and my wife, and I love being a husband and a father. It's an amazing life for me today. My hobbies, I try to get to the gym 2 or 3 times a week. I like to play golf, but don't get a chance to do it as often as I'd like. I'd like to get up to the States around Montana and in Colorado mainly during the ski season, which is what I grew up doing in Montana. Again, basically my family is my priority aside from the program and the work that I do with people and with my sponsor. So that's basically that for my hobbies. I wake up with, like I said, my 2 daughters every morning around 5:30, get them ready for school, take them to kindergarten, and then from there I tend to go to a place that has some sort of internet, and I sit down and I get a few hours to work on my computer, do whatever I need to work-wise before going and picking them up again and spending the afternoons and the evenings with my kids and my family. So again, it's pretty much routine type of life, but it's exciting and I enjoy it thoroughly.
I've seen the girls. They're super cute.
Yeah, they're a handful. But they're fun.
No, they are. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So you just celebrated 10 years, Shane. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about how that felt, how you felt celebrating those 10 years. The other day I asked you about it. You told me a great story of what happened during your anniversary meeting. So just real quick, tell us about that moment.
Anniversaries are always kind of a strange thing for me. It's one of those days where you get to reflect back on things and you obviously feel a lot of gratitude, but it's again just another day. So it's one to be rejoiced and be happy about, but at the same time, you go through the day as you normally would. The difference for me, obviously, was I was celebrating and getting lots of phone calls and emails and texts and things about congratulations. Yeah, at the meeting, which was a great Saturday morning meeting over at the zoo group, I had the chance to speak and sit down and tell my story, which is always something that I really enjoy doing. And at the end of it, my wife showed up with my oldest daughter while we were doing a closing ceremony. And she came walking in with a card that she had made that morning. And it was a moment that can't explain. It was one of those moments where immediately you get overwhelmed with emotion and tear up. She came jumping in my arms. After a brief hug and kiss, she joined hands with everybody, and we did the Serenity Prayer to close the meeting out. It was amazing. But that's what recovery provides me today is, those joys in life and those moments with my daughter and my family that I never had before. And if I hadn't found this program, I wouldn't have today. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
I love that story. My daughter's 11 now, but I remember when she was that old, and anything that she did at that moment in time would bring me to tears because I was so grateful that I wasn't using, that I wasn't this disaster in her life.
And it's one of those things where you're so grateful. For me, I know that this isn't always for everybody, but for me, I was so grateful that not only my wife, but my kids never had to see me in my addiction. They never got to see the monster within when I was actively using and drinking. It's one of those things where she'll never know that about me, hopefully. She comes in that meeting and she doesn't know what she's there for. She just wants to say happy anniversary and give Daddy a big hug. And it's, that's such a blessing versus her having some strong memories of some of the ugliness that I could have created if I had been married or had kids back then. So it's a wonderful thing. I'm happy, very happy.
Yes, I can totally relate. So let's talk about some of that ugliness. How old were you the first time you used drugs or alcohol? And more importantly, how did that make you feel?
Okay, to the best of my knowledge, it's a hard thing for me to remember exactly, but as far as the age, I'd like to say I was around 12 years old, but I remember specifically we were at our family cabins in Montana on the 4th of July weekend, which is something we did every year. As a family of our size, everybody came together with not only food, but drinks and whatnot, and the entire fridge and pantries were stocked. And I remember going into the pantry as a young child and thinking, my God, look at all the stacked sodas and liquor and bottles of, every type of hard alcohol you could think of. And, our family was very unusual in terms of what they considered recreational time. the cabin had a large lodge, which is where this kitchen was, and it had everything from a blackjack table to a roulette table to a pool table to a foosball table. And I remember as a young kid going in there with our allowance and spending our allowance at the roulette table with my uncle dealing, and that was kind of a life lesson. When you lost, you lost. There was no more. When you won, celebrate, but be careful. And that was something that we learned. I don't know if that was part of our family just learning life lessons or if it was just a sickness. I'm not sure, but aside from that was, like I said, this pantry of alcohol. And I remember my cousins and I, sneaking a six-pack of beer out of there and running off into the woods and drinking it. And, yeah, it was accompanied with an amazing feeling of adulthood. I always got an excitement from getting away with things. I'll get into that more of my story, but I felt like we were getting away with something. The alcohol, of course, made me feel amazing, but it was quickly followed with feeling sick and dizzy. But just like a lot of times throughout my life later on, I didn't get caught that time for whatever reason. Nothing ever came from the fact that we drank 6 beers or between the 3 of us or whatever it was. Came home probably, smelling like alcohol. And I don't know. It was strange. I don't recall any consequences from that first action other than feeling sick.
Well, with that being said, it's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey into recovery up until today. So Shane, take it away.
Okay. We just got done talking about the first time I drank. I was born in Billings, Montana, to a middle upper class family, I would consider. However, our family was a fourth generation. We had a fourth generation family business that was one of those things as a kid that we really didn't realize was a privilege. And at that time, like I said, we were a middle upper class family, so nothing really came of it. But with that, we were also expected to act a certain way. It was kind of a strange thing within our family where our family members, my mother's sisters and brothers, seemed to kind of be a little bit at, maybe my interpretation would be they were in a little bit of competition with one another about how their kids acted or behaved or what their successes were in life. And so I just remember always feeling like we had to act like we were the best kids. And if something was bothering us, you didn't express that. It was one of those things where you acted as if everything was perfect. Not that we had a lot to complain about, but as kids, you want to act like a kid. And I just remember feeling like you couldn't do that. I remember going to dinners, family dinners, that would take 4 or 5 hours to get through. And as a young child, that was just a very long, monotonous, difficult thing to sit through. But like I said, you're expected to act and behave appropriately, even in those long hour dinners. So it was a little different, I think. I look back and I know that it wasn't normal for most kids to have to go through something like that. And again, I don't know how much of it attributed to my alcoholism later on in life, but I definitely know that when I was able to act and do what I wanted as a young adult, I started to act out differently than maybe in my younger years. I remember as a young kid feeling like a little bit, I felt comfortable being isolated to some extent. I was an outgoing kid and I had lots of friends growing up, but I remember a lot of times in my home sitting on the couch and looking out the window and watching other kids play in the neighborhood and feeling really good about just watching from afar. When I remember on occasion, kids would come and knock on the door to see if I could come play, and I remember not answering the door because I was like, I just don't want to go do it. I feel comfortable here. Where most kids would be, I think, would not be sitting on the couch watching other kids play. They'd be out there doing it themselves. So I know that there was some isolation in my younger years that I enjoyed, and I still today enjoy. I don't consider it isolation today. I consider it alone time and some time to recharge, especially with kids now in my life. But that's important to me today, and I think back then it was important as well for some reason. And I think at that age, it was a healthy thing, but later in life, as things got going and alcohol and drugs entered into my life, that only amplified that isolation factor for me. I think that was basically, my early years growing up. We've already talked about my first drinking in around 12 years old. Let me see. I played lots of sports growing up. Baseball, I was on the ski team, played golf, all through growing up in high school. So I would consider a normal kid for the most part. I mean, I again enjoyed being out and doing things. I was athletic. I had, a loving, supportive family. Nothing seemed to be any sort of red flags in my early years. Even after drinking that first time at 12 years old, I didn't pick up or do anything beyond that I can recall until I was in my early high school freshman year. And that was when I was introduced to weed for the first time. And, of course, lots of partying and drinking on the weekends with my friends. But I chalk all that up to a lot of just experimental stuff. Even, in the excess that we maybe have done, we did it back then. It was still a lot of experimenting. Everything from weed to hallucinogenics and drinking and, a lot of different stuff. As weird as it sounds, I don't consider that to be normal, but I think it's considered to be experimenting in a high school setting.
Right.
And again, even through high school, I never had anything happen. I never had any consequences come down on me, any severe consequences. I got caught drinking a couple times, but nothing was really done about it by my parents. It wasn't, I didn't wreck a car. I didn't get I didn't get any MIPs. I didn't get any DUIs. I didn't do anything to bring about any sort of harm or any severe consequences, like I said. So,
MIP? What's an MIP?
An MIP back in Montana was a minor in possession, which normally meant alcohol related, but it could have been anything. And a lot of my friends got those as if, on a weekend basis. It wasn't uncommon to hear your friends, they got another MIP, chalk it up. And I never ended up getting that. I don't know how it ever happened. Maybe it was just fate or who knows, but for whatever reasons, I never got caught. And maybe if I had, things would have changed back then, because I do know later in my story, when I actually came to the end of my using and drinking, when I got caught, so to speak, in my mind, the gig was up. I was ready to quit at that time. And I don't know if I had been caught or if some severe consequences would have happened earlier in my life, if things would have changed or not. Who's to say? But I entered into college after I graduated from high school. I was never a high A student. I always kind of did the average, the minimum amount.
I hear you.
I don't know if I intentionally meant to set the bar low to never have to, reach that high level again of expectation. But, I just never felt the need to succeed or exceed to the level of to being, a straight A student or anything like that. When it came to athletics, I was definitely competitive and strived to, be the best I could. But academically, it never was like that for me. And that continued all the way through college as well. I don't know how I graduated college exactly. I just know that it was really just one foot in front of the other. For whatever reasons, I, again, was doing college as just the next thing in my life. It was what was expected of us as kids growing up. I didn't feel comfortable in a social situation a lot of times. Alcohol and drugs definitely had entered my life, and I knew that those things helped me in those situations. College was, again, a time for me to set 4 years aside to go do whatever I wanted to do, and in the meantime get some sort of degree. But my focus was to enjoy 4 years of being away from family and do what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate in the sense that my family paid for my college and they gave me an allowance, so I didn't need to worry about going and finding a job. They wanted me to study and focus on my school, and that just allowed me to have a lot of free time to do whatever I wanted to do. And I mentioned earlier in the story about my family being having a fourth generation business involved. And right around when I went to college was when that business became something. And I was able to take away some cash periodically from that business as an owner, as a shareholder in that business. And that definitely allowed me to fund whatever I wanted to do. I wasn't dependent on just that allowance that my parents were giving me. So
when did that happen? How old were you when you started receiving royalties from your business?
It wasn't really royalties. It was a note that I had access to in the business, which was mainly used to pay taxes on my ownership. But there was always an excess amount in there, so I had the ability to go and dip in there when I wanted to. And that was probably around the age of 19 or 20.
Wow.
So, and my parents didn't have any way of knowing what I was taking in and out of that account. I didn't abuse it, but I certainly used it. I guess that's something to be said about me too. Growing up, I never crossed the line too far. I always knew the boundaries. I knew where to push it. I never took it to the extreme where I'd get in trouble. I knew that benefits and the privileges I had came from, being somewhat of a decent son to my parents. And if I ever crossed that line, then a lot of those benefits, went away. So I know that was part of my manipulation tactic. I knew how to work the system. I knew how to push it and not to get too far is basically what I'm getting at. And again, that started at an early age. I know I grew up learning how to manipulate and to work the system with my parents. I had two older brothers that paved the way for me, that I got to see a lot of the stuff that they did, and I learned vicariously through them what not to do and how to avoid certain things. So that's that. Getting into college, I joined a fraternity house. That was something that I plugged into right away. It was an immediate connection to the social pipeline of college, sorority girls, and a party lifestyle that I definitely wanted. That took me all the way through my 4.5 years of college. I remember the first time I used cocaine, we were in Las Vegas, of all places, on a fraternity convention. And we were sent there, 3 or 4 of us were sent there from our fraternity to represent our chapter and go to the meetings. And I can tell you that we didn't go to one single meeting. We partied the entire time. And like I said, that was when I was introduced to cocaine. And I remember that first line, and I thought to myself, this is the most amazing thing in the world. Coupled with drinking, there's no stopping me. This is the life I was meant to live. That little did I know that was the start for some serious things to come. My drug addiction and my drinking definitely went into a whole nother gear at that point in time. I came back to school and, I found a cocaine dealer there and a mushroom dealer, and that was my focus, was to drink and to party as much as possible. But I still maintained a level of academic participation. I went to classes. I got the grades that I needed to get. As long as I did that, there was no questions asked by my parents. They didn't get to see the drinking and the using when I was around. I avoided that. Again, that was part of me just keeping it to myself and working the system, because if I had done it around them, then it would have just raised red flags, and who knows if they would have, put a stop to anything. And I was enjoying my life too much at that point in time.
Right.
I finished college. Again, didn't really know how I did that. Oh, by the way, when I was in college, I realized that cocaine was really expensive and it was sometimes hard to get. So I got this friend of mine who introduced me to a doctor on campus that was passing out Ritalin prescription for students that were having a hard time studying, and I thought that was what I needed. And I got 60 pills a month, and it didn't take me long to get through those 60 pills. Started with, one pill for studying at night to, 2 pills studying at night to taking 3 at night. And then it quickly got into, okay, well, I can snort these now. It'll have a stronger, quicker effect while I'm studying. And then it, bled right into my social life. And I was using it in substitute for buying cocaine. I had the same effects, more or less, from snorting Ritalin that I did when I was, using cocaine. And so I found that the 60 pills, when I got those at the beginning of the month, would be gone in less than a week. That was in combination with a bunch of other stuff. So my addiction and my drinking had definitely, gotten to a level that was beyond just experimenting. It was beyond what other kids were doing in college. I hid it from most people. I remember getting extra 6-packs or extra, bottles of booze and extra weed and when around people. And when we were going to, when we buy something to share, I would always have my separate stash or my separate drinks to do when I could sneak away. It was one of those things where, again, getting back to the whole getting away of things, I really got off on that. And I also didn't want to share. And I didn't want people to know I was doing more than what they were doing. And that was a lot in retrospect. I needed more and more and more. That was kind of how I did that without other people who were doing the same thing with me, but at a different level, without them saying, hey, God, you're getting out of control. Like you need to, maybe check yourself out a little bit here or whatever the case may be. I just knew it wasn't right, but I wasn't willing to accept that it was a problem. And
right.
So anyway, I graduated college with a degree in psychology, a bachelor's degree in psychology and an emphasis in business marketing, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no idea what I was going to do for a job. I didn't know what my next step was, and I started to look around as to where I wanted to move. And from Montana, where I was in college, I ended up moving out to Seattle, Washington, where my brother lived, and he took me in for a few months while I got my feet, settled. And I found a sports marketing job that I started working at, kind of a back room type marketing job. It was kind of a strange thing where ultimately the boss didn't end up paying me 3 times for 3 checks that bounced, and that was ultimately kind of the theme of the whole business. It wasn't a respectable marketing position, but it was something I could put on, tell my folks that I was doing back in Montana, and they would say, oh, he's got a job in Seattle, he's okay. Right around 2003, the same friend of mine that introduced me to Ritalin and to cocaine moved back to Seattle, where he was originally from, after graduating college. He and I were roommates in college, fraternity brothers back in Montana, and he finally finished college and moved back to Seattle. And he called me up and says, hey, I got this business idea. You're interested in sitting down and help me move this thing forward? And I said, yeah, why not? I hate my job. I'm not getting paid. Perfect time to change things. I didn't tell my parents for 3 or 4 months afterwards, but I ended up quitting that job. My buddy and I started researching and developing a new business opportunity that ultimately would take me to Costa Rica. During those 2 years in Seattle, my alcoholism and my drug addiction was on full flight. I mean, I was missing days meeting with this friend of mine to, get this business going. I would sleep in way too long. I would party all night long by myself in my room, if you call that partying. As a drinker and as an addict, my disease had taken me inside. I was no longer going to the clubs. I was no longer doing things socially. I was more comfortable in my room doing my thing all night long than anywhere else. Again, I never really realized that was something that to be concerned about. I never really took the time to look at it and say, oh, this is really a really screwed up situation. You need to acknowledge it. My disease didn't want me to acknowledge it at that time, is how I kind of see it today.
So real quick, timeline-wise. So this is 2003. You got a buddy of yours.
Well, this is actually 2001 when he showed up, and then around 2002, early 2002 is when we started doing our research and development and working out things. And in 2003, early 2003 is when I moved to Costa Rica.
Okay. So 2003, you come to Costa Rica. So you had been partying like a madman for 2 years, and at the same time were able to put together a business and get started in Costa Rica?
Yeah, we were able to raise, again, I had some, this friend of mine who was my equal co-founder, business partner, and then we had brought in a few other guys that were from our college as well, that we just thought, well, let's just, if we're going to start something, let's get our buddies that we went to college with who have different specialties in whatever areas, and let's start this thing up. And when we finally moved to Costa Rica, there was 5 of us. And, the 5 of us had, in a year and a half, had raised nearly $1 million from family and friends to start this business. And we were working, honestly, about 18 to 20 hours a day. We were around the clock. It required us working. It was a global business, online business, so it required us to, be awake and to service those clients and those customers early on, all 24 hours a day. So we would take shifts, and the number of hours we would work it was ridiculous. And the stress that I personally felt with family money involved in this thing definitely attributed to where I ended up. I never was able to deal with stress and some of my shortfallings or my shortcomings very well. I never felt good enough about myself. I never felt smart enough. I never felt like I should be able to do the things that I was entrusted to do with this money and with this business opportunity. But with my friends' help and their specialties, we were able to do what we were able to do. But it didn't diminish the fact that I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel the self-respect or the self-value. The value I felt for myself was really low. Again, that kind of, as things picked up and things got more complicated and more involved, I just became more and more separated from everybody else. And I did come to Costa Rica and I said to myself I wouldn't drink or use anything for 3 months, and I didn't do that for 3 months. And then one night, a buddy of mine who knew I liked to smoke weed, said, you know what, we've been down here, you've been doing great, let's just have some fun, and why don't you buy some weed from that guy we just passed by? And I did. That same night, I bought an 8-ball of Coke, some weed, a whole bag of weed, and we were introduced to a whole nother Costa Rica we were not even exposed to for the first 3 months. We didn't know this existed. We'd heard stories, I guess, but we never really took it in and did it. We went to all the clubs and, the girls in Costa Rica and how they flocked to us just because we were, from somewhere else in the States. And, we were living high. We were like, this is absolutely the best place in the world. This is where we were meant to live and to be. Throughout that night, we went to great lengths to prove that we could drink as much as we wanted and do whatever we wanted. And from that moment until a year and a half later, until I was intervened on, I went to the nth degree. I remember having a motorcycle accident. I totaled a motorcycle, a Ninja street rocket on the interstate down here. And I had, we were street racing at night. And, of course, all hopped up on Coke and everything else. I didn't notice that they had been doing some street construction. They had been fixing an overpass. And they were directing traffic to an off-ramp to an on-ramp to avoid the gap that was now exposed in the highway. And, by the time I noticed it, it was too late. And I had to put the skids on the bike. I laid the bike down. I went through the construction site. And, I was wearing nothing but flip-flops, T-shirt, and shorts, and a helmet. And how I lived through that and how I didn't break a bone or break my neck or die is beyond me. It was HP, higher power, God in my life, and I didn't know it. I didn't know that God was working in my life at that time, and I wasn't at a point where I cared. I just knew that I survived, and for the next week I spent laid up in my room, mending myself from the road rash I'd received. It was perfect for me because I was now secluded with an excuse to not be downstairs working in we worked in our house, but working with the other guys. I was in my room, isolated with my drugs and with my alcohol, and I was happier than a pig in shit. And I just kept thinking, how can I continue to make excuses or to work out a situation where I can work from my office or from my room and not be around those guys so I can continue to do what I'm doing. Shortly after I had healed up, I did convince the guys that I better worked from my office than if I had worked from my room than if I worked from the office downstairs. And we didn't have Wi-Fi internet at that time, so I fashioned a big, long blue Ethernet cable from the downstairs all the way up the stairs, through the corridor, my room, underneath the door, with this blue Ethernet cable that people had to step over and dip under to go up the stairs. And it just was a clear sign that there's something wrong. But
Addict style.
Totally, total addict style. Don't mind me. This all makes sense. I'm better. I'm better, more efficient, and more productive if I'm up here by myself. It was a crazy, crazy time. And just to mention, the guy I started this business with, who initially contacted me in Seattle, was really off the deep end as well. He didn't take it to the level I did with the drugs, but he certainly was a full-blown alcoholic when it came to the nighttime, oftentimes, drinking himself to sleep with a bottle in his hand. I was, yes, alcoholic, but drugs were definitely my thing in the evenings. It kept me up throughout the night. It didn't make me feel sick. That was my sweet spot. It was a great time for me, but at the same time, a really sick and lonely time, and I didn't realize that until later on in my life. Throughout this year and a half, we moved from different houses to different houses, and things got even more and more crazy. My appearance, little to my knowledge, I didn't know that I was looking the way I was, but I ended up getting to a point where I think I weighed, when I went into rehab, about 115, 120 pounds. My normal weight's about 160, so I'm not big to begin with, but I'm, certainly not 120 pounds. I hadn't seen the light of day for a long, long time. And so I was pale. I was constantly sweating, trembling, malnourished. I never ate. If I did, it was like buttered cookies and things like that, just to get me through 5 minutes where I didn't want to waste eating. I wanted to be back doing what I was doing. I would sit there all night long, and for whatever reason, I would pull out my eyebrows with tweezers in front of the mirror. I would be so just locked into the mirror and pulling out my eyebrows that by the time I was done, I'd realize that I had no eyebrow on one side. And then I would start on the other side thinking, well, I better even this out. I don't know what it was that drove me to do that, other than just sheer boredom and sheer obsessive compulsive behavior while you're all up in your room. There's a lot you can find to do, I guess, in your room when you've been there a long time. And I would be in my room for days and days on end. A few other funny stories is when I was living with these guys, these same guys in our last house that we lived together. They all decided to go off to the beach, and at this point, I was pretty much left on the uninvite list. They knew that I didn't want to go, and I would say no matter what. But aside from that, they didn't want me to be there. I didn't know that, but they didn't want me to be there because they knew that I was going to be holed up somewhere. They ended up coming back 2 days later to a flooded house, and I didn't know the house was flooded. The house wasn't even. It was a one-story house, but my room, for whatever reason, sat a little higher than maybe the hallways or the rest of the house. So the water hadn't into my room, so I hadn't noticed it because I hadn't gotten out of my room. And these guys came home, and they banged on my door and said, "What did you happen?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "The house is completely flooded." I said, "No, it's not." And, who am I to say it's not when they just said it was, and I haven't been out of my room.
Right.
But I said, "No, it's not." And I stepped out of the room, and there was about 3 inches of water throughout the entire house. And he said, "What the hell happened?" And I said, "I don't have a clue, but this wasn't like this an hour ago. I just got home." And they said, "That's impossible. That's impossible." And it had just, what had happened, it had been raining for 2 days straight. And because of our house being a one-floor house and not proper drainage system, I guess, in the yard, it had all come through the whole entire house, and I didn't notice. But that was the level I was at. I didn't come out of my room for 3 or 4 days at a time. I didn't realize the house was flooded. When I did find out the house was flooded, I would say it wasn't, or it just happened an hour ago, or whatever. I was just in such denial and lying, not only to myself but to anybody and everybody.
Get your drugs.
Well, that's the funny thing is I, at that particular day or that particular run, had purchased plenty. My dealer, actually, I never had to leave my room. My dealer would come in the gate. I would unlock the gate because I had a control. And he would come into the backyard, into where my window was. We would pass it through the window so I wouldn't have to leave the bedroom. And he was a taxi driver, so he always had someone. If he would have it in 20 minutes, and he'd be at my house. So that's how I lived for a long, long time. I do remember a trip when we went to Cartagena, Colombia, and getting mugged there. and they stole all my money and took me to some ATMs. What had happened, once again, we had gone out as a group of friends, gone out and partied, and I decided to take it to another level. These guys on the street had seen me from our hotel to these cash machines, which were just right around the corner from our hotel. They had seen me do this, a couple times from the time that we had gotten. I had been wandering around all late at night. These guys approached me while I was walking around and said, "Why don't you accompany us to the cash machine?" And they literally took me to the cash machine and made me pull off the maximum amount that I could on both machines, which at that time I think it was like maybe $500 per cash machine. It wasn't like, they were able to empty an account out, but it was a lot of money, and, it was at knife point, and it was a scary moment. But, I remember thinking afterwards, well, I escaped again, back to my drugs, and that's what I did. I went back. And I went to the beach, passed out on the beach after using more cocaine and drinking myself into a slumber. Then woke up on the beach in the lawn chair, and this is after I had just gotten mugged and could have lost my life. And I remember waking and walking back to the hotel room and making up this grand story that these guys had, kidnapped me and kept me away. It was fucked up stuff. And I mean, I just know that these guys were just shaking their heads. These friends of mine were just shaking their heads going, what is with this guy? Like, seriously, he can't think that we believe this stuff. Like, this is way too far out there. But the reality is, even if I had told them the true story, they probably wouldn't have believed me because it was way out there. I mean, these things just don't happen to the normal person.
What were you guys doing in Cartagena?
We just went there for a trip. We just went there for, a weekend, 3-day trip.
Just for fun?
And just for fun.
How'd you find the drugs?
Well, it doesn't take long. You ask a guy on the street. I mean, I for some reason, I could always find drugs or alcohol wherever I was at. It didn't matter.
Yeah, no. Trust me. I know. I'm just asking just because.
Yeah, everybody knows.
For people to hear that stuff, it's like you put your life in absolute risk. You land someplace, you don't know anybody, you walk up to somebody and go, buenos dias, cocaine?
Yep.
Crazy.
And I oftentimes look back, Omar, at the times I spent in doing crazy things, even today in my sobriety. I look back and I think to myself, I'll be in some obscure place in Costa Rica and I'll think to myself, my family only knew where I was at right now. They would just shake their head. I mean, from Billings, Montana to here, what I'm experiencing at this very moment, they wouldn't believe where I'm at and what I'm doing right now. This is not within their realm of what is possible or what you would do. And I think about my active addiction and what I was doing and where I put myself at any moment in time. What was my family doing? What were they doing at that time, and where was I at? And how screwed up is that? Just the comparisons are really, quite phenomenal. But again, none of this ever points to an issue and a problem. I never really thought of it. I don't even remember recalling saying, you're probably a drug addict, but don't think about it or don't mention it to anybody. I never thought that way. I just thought of it as a moment in my life, maybe measure the amounts I was doing. It never really clicked with me. When I was still actually functioning and working at the office, I back to what I would like to call my 007. I always thought it was a sneaky spy kind of thing that I get away with. But my 007 of my disease, I remember always getting a high off of like getting away or thinking I was getting away or pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. Aside from the fact that I was using and drinking all throughout the days, I was always thinking I got away with it. And truth be told, I did get away with a lot of things. I remember sitting in an office that I shared with another friend of mine, and we shared a printer outside of the office and outside of our enclosed office. And when we needed to print something, he would go and, get it off the printer, or if he went to the bathroom or whatever the case may be. I wouldn't know however long he was going to be gone, but I remember having lines chalked up already next to me, covered by a little Post-it note in a V shape, so, no one would see it, but don't look at the fact that there's a V, a Post-it note in a V shape. Don't look at that. That's not strange or out of the ordinary. And I would sit there and wait for him to leave the room. And as he left, I would try to do as many lines as I could before he came back in and be in a position where he wouldn't see me, kind of shift or whatever. I'd be in a position in front of my computer when he returned. And I would do that all the time. I would do that and think,
getting away with it. I was thinking I was the funniest person in the world. Meanwhile, I would be sniffing and, choking and coughing and, heading off to the bathroom every 2 minutes as well. Like, my addiction with cocaine specifically at that time was out of control. It was rare for me to go 5 minutes without having to hit it again. A long time after I got sober and clean, I remember a phantom feeling. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a phantom feeling that you feel in your body if you're used to having something up against you, or a very, recognizable feeling in your body. You can feel it even though it's not there. I used to keep my bag inside of my right sock right next to my ankle, and that's where I would have it instead of in my pocket or anything. And I would have it with a little straw stuck in it with a rubber band wrapped around it. And at any point in time, I could pull it out and just sniff and get a good bump. The problem with that is that I never knew how much I would get. If the straw was loaded, I would sniff and I would get one that would just, almost knock you off your feet. And sometimes you get a little one. For a long time after I got clean and sober, I remember always feeling the bag down next to my ankle, underneath my sock. And even still today, at times, I'll feel something and it'll remind me of that. It's a strange thing to have happen to you. Even 10 years later, after being, in the program as long as I have, I still can feel that. I can still remember it as if it was yesterday. It's a very strong memory that I have today.
This is gold.
So that's some glimpses of the darkness and disease in a very short amount of time. Now, people ask, how long was your active use and drinking? And I have to say, I guess from age 12 when I first had my drink until 27 when I was intervened on. But my real deep, dark, disease started when I was in Seattle, when I moved to Seattle, and I started hibernating and getting really deep into things. And that was right around, 21 years old. So basically 6 years of really, really hard using and drinking and isolation is what I would attribute to. The years before that, I would just chalk up to, yes, abuse, but a lot of experimenting and what people typically would do, I would consider in college and early in high school. So
for those of you listening, just so if you can even imagine the kind of description of a skinny 120-pound kid that has no eyebrows to the man that is Shane, blue eyes, blonde-haired, really good-looking kid, the picture that you paint is not the person that I know today. And it's a wonderful testament to the program and an absolute giant warning sign for anyone that's dabbling in addiction, that it can take you to places that you wouldn't even imagine. So,
well, and I like the description of me better than the one I would give me today. Very nice to say. And, it is true. It is true, the fact that disease can creep into your life and you don't realize it. It's insidious, it's sneaky, it's deadly, and how it comes into your life without you really knowing it, for me at least, is absolutely amazing. So those stories, there's so many more within that year and a half that I, either don't recall or I can't recall right now that, just make you shake your head and wonder how I escaped and how I'm alive today, really. But I do know that a higher power was working my life way before I was, aware of it. If I had been introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, I don't know if I would have accepted it at that time. I know that there's a lot of people out there that need a program, who want a program, but unless you're willing to do the program, it's really all for nothing. And I know that from seeing people come into to the program to date, is that unless someone wants to do it and does it, they really don't meet the criteria for recovery. And that's the hard truth of the disease in this program, is that there's a lot of people that need it, want it, but unless they start doing it, they're not going to see the benefits of the program. Which brings me to, I guess, the final closing of my Costa Rica dark days, and that was when my girlfriend let my partners in business know that things had gotten really out of control. Not that they really didn't know already, but one night she was staying with me, and I had a severe nosebleed that wouldn't stop, and I remember soaking an entire towel of blood before it actually came to an end. Meanwhile, again, the level of disease that I was living in, while my nose was bleeding, I was still trying to snort cocaine. And I'd never thought of it as a problem again. And she woke up that next morning and she went to my partners at the office and, said, "You've got a severe problem." And that's when they decided to call my mom. She didn't waste a minute on the phone with those guys and immediately got on the phone, called my uncle, who at the time had 24 years of recovery, sobriety, and clean time. He was a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor for teens and adolescents and had the skill set to do an intervention. That's just what happened.
He immediately hopped on a plane and flew down here. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know any of this was happening. My girlfriend told me a day after they called my mother. I immediately stopped everything. The gig was up. I was petrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. And as long as I didn't drink or use it, until he showed up, I was going to be able to play it off. He showed up one morning at my apartment, and I knew exactly who it was knocking before I opened the door. He opened the door, and he says, "How you doing?" And I looked at him and pretended to be surprised, and I said, "What are you doing here? What do you mean? How did?" And trying to play it off again. He says, "Well, I'm here because I'm concerned about you and I'm worried about you. And your friends called, and they also are worried." And I said, "What about?" Pretending I didn't know. He says, "I think you know." He says, "If you let me in, I want to try to help." And, I'll never know exactly why I never ran or left my condo or my apartment and fled when I heard that, he was on his way down. I don't know why I opened that door knowing he was there. I don't know why I let him in. I just know that in my recovery, I know now that I had to have been desperate. I had to have been willing. I had to have been, ready to do whatever was necessary at that time. And I had no clue what I was getting into. I did not have the slightest clue. I had no idea that what rehab was going to be like. I didn't know anything. But even while letting him into my apartment to do the intervention, I fought it. As a good alcoholic addict, I acted like I didn't have a problem. I tried to convince him there was no issues. And then, midway through, after a lot of crying and a lot of my friends telling me what they thought and this and that, I admitted that I needed some help. And he whipped out a ticket from his back pocket and says, "Well, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go. We got a plane ticket here your mom purchased. We're going up to Minnesota. You're going to go to a rehab center, a 30-day in-program recovery center, and we're going to head out right now. Just pack your stuff and let's get going." And 2 hours later, we were on a plane out of San Jose, headed to Minnesota, and I didn't have a jacket. I didn't have, one item of warm clothes, and I was heading up in November. Minnesota weather is extremely cold. But again, I was willing to do whatever I needed to at that point in time. And, I'm so grateful for him and what he did for me that day and did for me while he was alive, while I was, in early recovery. And what he still does for me today is unbelievable. The spirit of his recovery and of him still lives within me and lives within this program. And it's something that I'll never take for granted, and I'll always appreciate what he did for me.
And when I returned to Costa Rica after rehab, Omar here was the first person I met who was in rehab. He took me to my first meeting. He ultimately was my first sponsor. And Omar and the other sponsors and the other people I have in this program, a great amount of debt. I can't imagine where my life would be today if I hadn't met Omar and been introduced to the program and to the rooms of recovery here in Costa Rica when I returned. But here I am still today, 10 years later, living in Costa Rica, married to a wonderful wife and 2 beautiful kids. I can't imagine my life any other way. It truly does. I know this is said all the time, but my life gets better and better every single day. It comes with frustration. It comes with difficulties. The program makes you aware of things about yourself that there's a friend of mine in the program who I won't mention names, but he always says awareness sucks. When you work this program long enough and you work the steps, you start to become aware of your own defects, your own character flaws, and you have to own up to those things on a daily basis. They don't go away necessarily. They diminish over time. But, for me, being in a relationship is having a magnifying glass on my character defects, and it's something I have to deal with on a daily basis. I can be the meanest, cruelest person when I'm not connected to the program, to the closest people in my life, and the people that I love and cherish the most. And that is just a fucked up thing to think about, that I can be as cruel and mean to somebody and who is the closest person in my life if I'm connected. I need the reminder on a daily basis that I'm an alcoholic addict who forgets every single day everything he learned the day before. And if I don't go to meetings, if I don't stay connected, if I don't do the things I'm supposed to with program sponsorship and being sponsored, of service, I quickly become a complete asshole, someone you do not want to be around, and my wife can contest to that. It's really screwed up. So yeah, then after, finally going to my first meeting here in Costa Rica with Omar again, I ended up finding the Vigilance group as my home group. I was in the program going to meetings regularly for the first 3 months before I decided I needed to find a sponsor, and I approached Omar, you, and I remember those words vividly, what you said to me when I asked if you would sponsor me. You said, "Are you willing to do anything and everything that's necessary?" And at the time,
are you ready to go to any length?
There it is, exactly. Are you willing to go to any length for your recovery? And I remember hearing those words and thinking, yeah, of course, but never do you really realize what that means. And he followed that by saying, the girlfriend you're with, you need to get rid of her. And she's not good for you. You don't know how to have a relationship in this period of your time. You need to focus on you before you can focus on caring for anyone else or being in a relationship. And so I did. I said yes, and I immediately went and did exactly what he said. And, that first year of recovery, for me, it wasn't hard. Giving up drugs and alcohol wasn't hard at that point. I thought it was just about getting to some meetings, doing a few things your sponsor said. I was pretty reluctant about getting really into the steps, even though, you end up pushing me quite a bit, which was very helpful. But it was crucial for me to get into those steps ultimately. And when I did, I started to experience, what we all know as the miracles of the program coming true. And immediately I remember getting connected. Like I said, every night we would go to a meeting. There was a group of us, including Omar, you and I, and Juan and a few others, that we actually worked within the same building. And I remember at the end of the day, it was just automatic. You just went to a meeting at 7 o'clock, and everybody you saw during the day, you saw at night. We would have a wonderful meeting, and then, there was always a group of guys or, a combination of guys or girls that would end up going to dinner somewhere. And I just remember those dinners and those times after the meeting really being so important to my early recovery, because I didn't know where else to go after that. I would have gone home and I would have sat in front of the TV and felt sorry for myself possibly, or been bored, or whatever the case may have been. It was just really crucial for me for that fellowship to continue beyond the meeting. When we did finish dinner, I would go home and I'd go to bed and I'd wake up and do the same thing the next day. There was really no alone time. There was no downtime for me. I know for me that was really important in my early recovery. It also established what is still today some great, great friendships, some lifelong friendships that, is just, I'd like to say only exists when you work the program, when you have a fellowship like we did back then, but I know it still exists today. I know when newcomers come in, they can find that if they want it. I know that saved my ass. And we worked through, I don't even remember how many steps that first year. I do know I was quite slow, but I do know that whenever I came through a point in time where I finished a step, we reached some part within a step, it always seemed to fit with how my life was going. So I know it was God's time and God's will at that time that was working for me, because just like I said, as soon as you finish step one, I was in a position where I could really embrace and hold on to that step one and what it meant, and so on and so forth. Getting towards the end of my first year, which was a huge, I guess, feat or milestone to achieve and to make. You, Omar, remember this as well as anybody. Omar and a good friend of mine, Lane, in the program, she and you got together, and without me being known, I was surprised by my mother showing up in Costa Rica at my home group. You guys did it in a secretive way and collaborated and got her down here. And I just remember walking into the meeting and kind of having a sense that something was going on, because eyeballs were on me, and I know it was to see my reaction. And as you'd imagine, my reaction was very emotional. And when I walked in there, she was kind of tucked away in the corner, and she appeared, and it's just one of those things that I'll never forget. And such a powerful, powerful moment, and what a wonderful thing for friends in the program to do for somebody. to take time out of their own day, the energy that it requires to organize it, to go get my mother, to hide her away for the entire day, bring her to a meeting. That's a lot of work just to provide a nice, wonderful surprise for someone in the program. And those are the blessings that I have from friends in the program. Those are the things that friends from the program do for you and I do for them, just because we want to and we know what it means and what it'll make the other person feel. And outside the program, friends are friends, but there's something within the program that you get that within that fellowship and that camaraderie that is just irreplaceable, I feel. And I do appreciate that. And again, it was just one of those things where I was just so overwhelmed with joy and tear and emotion. And God, I mean, she was the one who saved my ass. She was the one who called, the one and only person after she was called from my partners in business that, she called my uncle. I mean, if she hadn't called my uncle and thought, oh, I'll just come down there, who knows where things would have ended. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it was supposed to happen. And when she came in, all that kind of just came rushing back into my mind.
Funny how those images never go away. Since I was a part of that and we were setting up for your meeting, and I remember when your mother contacted Lane and I, and we put this thing together and got her to the meeting. And I just remember how excited we were. We couldn't wait. We were like, oh, my God, this is going to be so amazing. Shane's going to be so excited. This is so great. And even though it was something that's so beautiful for you and it's something that you're never going to forget, it was also beautiful for us and for your mother. And it was an experience that we all shared equally. It was just as impactful and powerful. I remember it like it was yesterday. And the tears in your mother's eyes and the tears in everyone's eyes, because at that moment, the anticipation was so high that once you walked in the room and saw your mom, it was just pretty awesome.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, no,
it was a beautiful moment in all of our recovery.
It was. I mentioned earlier in my story the 10-year anniversary I just recently had, and my daughter coming in. Those. It's just pretty funny. It's not funny, but it's special to me that my first year, my 10th year, a decade later, I have two amazing stories and memories of two of the most important women in my lives make an appearance into what is become my life, recovery. And I appreciate that they appreciate and recognize that they're a part of that whole thing as well. So I worked through the rest of my steps, and I think I finished in my 4th or 5th year. It took me quite a while, like I said, and today I still use the steps on a daily basis. It's crucial and key for me to get through my day. It's crucial and key for me to recognize where I've gone wrong, and more importantly, with that 10-step inventory at the end of each day, is to recognize the things you did right. I think that's important to know as well, and a lot of people think, oh, it's just focus on all the things I need to correct tomorrow. Well, there becomes a time in your life, in your recovery, where you start to recognize the things that you're doing in a way that only benefits and adds to society, and you're no longer part of the problem as much as you were before. And that's one of those spiritual awakenings I feel that you come to realize, is that, you know what, I am a better person than I was before, and by doing the things that have been suggested to me to do, I'm able to become a better person for not only myself but other people around me. And it's not perfect every day, I'm first to say that, but again, it's a day-by-day program, and you can always wipe the slate clean tomorrow or each night and go to bed with a clean conscience and wake up in the morning and do it again. And that's something that's just all new to me. That wasn't the case for me. It was this inevitable snowball that was just chasing me down the hill every morning when I woke up, like, oh boy, what did I have to figure out or do what I didn't do yesterday, or lie about what I said or didn't do the day before. It was just this constant scheming, and I could wake up like this morning and know that you got the whole day ahead of you, and make of it what you will. It's a wonderful gift. So that's essentially my story. I'm sure I missed a few things, but that's it in a nutshell.
That is beautiful, Shane. I love your story. I am very grateful that I had the privilege to be a part of that. Your recovery was a big part of my recovery. I only had, I think, what did I have, about a year?
I think you had a year and a half when I first came in.
I had maybe a year and a half. So we've grown up together as brothers in the fellowship. So we've gotten an opportunity to watch each other evolve. I think you were my first sponsee. And so for me, that's something that is so impactful and meaningful in my life, that I was able to take that, especially those first few years of watching you grow and working those steps, because we were working the steps side by side for the most part. I was ahead of you.
But that helped me so much for someone in the program to have fresh in mind. Each step, as I came across a step, you had just kind of finished one or gotten ahead of me, of course, but it was fresh in your mind. So it was just I don't know how that attributed exactly. I just remember having those meetings with you at Outback Steakhouse, the Bloomin' Onion, and that's just the power of the program. It's the power of sponsorship and sponsees, and yeah, that's what the whole program's about. It's amazing.
You still have that picture that I made you put on your step working?
Oh, yeah.
Your step book?
Yeah.
You still have it?
Self-will was written above the one, which was me with no eyebrows and skinny and frail and horrible looking, and the God's will was written above the other picture, which, I just happened to be, I think I was about 6 months sober when I had that picture, and I was one of those guys that came in and cleaned up pretty quickly.
Yes.
But thank God for me, I had this big hole in this, vacancy of any sort of spirituality inside. So it didn't matter what I looked like on the outside. I knew I needed something to fill that inside. It didn't matter if I looked $1 million. I still knew there was some stuff I needed to do about myself. So.
Yeah, you cleaned up real well. So you show up, and in Costa Rica, most of the Americans are wearing T-shirts and shorts.
Flip-flops.
For the most part, they're very sloppy. And, Shane was coming in with dress shirts and slacks. At least in the first year, it was creating that, completely detaching yourself from that person that you were. So you just kind of shed the outside skin. On the exterior, you look real good. So to remind you, it was like, okay, let's take this picture of you of back when you were using, when you were 120 pounds, you look like Phyllis Diller, all right? And let's put it right next to this picture where you're 6 months sober, and it's a completely different guy.
Yeah.
So let's just remember that as long as you're working this program, this is what you're going to look like. The minute you decide to take your will back, here's the possibilities.
Yep, exactly. I appreciate being on the show here. I appreciate you as a friend and the sponsorship that you provided me early on. And this program's amazing if you just want it and you do it.
Absolutely. It's HP, baby.
All right, Shane. Well, let's jump into the close of the show, which I call For the Newcomer. So for the newcomer, I'm going to ask you 5 questions about early recovery, and you're going to respond with inspiring and insightful answers you can share with our newcomer. Why does everybody laugh about that?
I think we all hope and want to be inspiring and insightful, but we'll see how that goes.
All right, we'll give it a shot. All right,
right.
We got to bring HP in here.
Yep.
All right?
Yep.
All right, so number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced into recovery?
Well, I was fortunate to not have relapsed. I don't know if that's what the question is really referring to. I do know that,
yes.
Like I said early on, for the first 3 months, I was pretty much in denial that I needed to work the program like anyone else, which is why I drug my feet in getting a sponsor. But I was, I think, probably coming in thinking I'll just kind of tiptoe into this and see how it goes, and I'll pick what I want and leave what I don't, and that I know wasn't feeling, like I said, that spiritual void that I had when I came into the program. So, but once I accepted that I was an alcoholic and that I was an addict, and that I started looking at the commonalities versus the differences as I sat through those first 3 months of meetings, I started to realize that there was more to this, and that I needed to dig my heels in a little deeper and work this thing like it needs to be worked. Again, I'm not perfect. I'm not the poster child for this program because, as Omar knows, I drug my feet a lot, and I needed a sponsor like Omar to kick me in the ass and to push me and threaten to fire me as a sponsee if I didn't do what it was necessary. And those little pushes along the way kept me moving along, so I appreciate that, and I think that's pretty much what it was. I just didn't think I was like everybody else, and I was hoping I still had this one chance of maybe coming in and just proving to everybody, or to myself more importantly, that this is all for everybody else. But now I got a few months under my belt. I don't need to do all these things that are really truly required and necessary for long-term sobriety.
Yep, that is definitely a stumbling block for many. So perfect. Now, number 2. At what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
I know that when I went to rehab, I didn't fight the fact that I was in need of some sort of help. Again, I don't know if I realized I was an alcoholic or an addict at that point in time. But, I did know that I had landed myself into a rehabilitation center for some reason. And again, I went with open arms when my uncle showed up. So when I was in rehab, I think is when I realized that the secular, habitual behavior that I had been living in was definitely addict behavior, addict-like, and I needed to recognize that on my own, I couldn't do this alone. I knew what I was going to do the next morning without having a program, you know what I mean? Like, I knew when I went to rehab, I started to do some insight with some counselors and some other addicts in the recovery center, and I just remember thinking, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I cannot, the old saying, one's too many, 1,000 never enough, and that was me. And I knew that without the help of others in this program, I probably wasn't going to survive. But again, going back to the first question, when I came back to Costa Rica 3 months into it, I still was kind of thinking, okay, I feel better, I'm looking better, maybe I don't need all this other stuff, I'll just pick and choose what I want. But definitely in rehab was my moment that, okay, you're an alcoholic, you're an addict, you need to accept that fact and start to do something about it.
Well, fortunately for you, that was very early on.
It was, and it was in rehab. I remember them before I could move on to fourth step and fifth step within the rehab. They moved me through those steps a lot faster than when I came to Costa Rica. But the fact is they wouldn't allow me to they wouldn't even recommend that I leave rehab until I accepted God into my life and came to know a God of my understanding. And as we know in the program, that's absolutely crucial to recognize earlier rather than later, to pick and hold on to something. It may not be that God that you have for the rest of your recovery. It most likely won't be. But it's something you can hold on to at first that will save your ass.
Beautiful. Great suggestion for the newcomer. Number 3, do you have a favorite book you would recommend to a newcomer that you read in early recovery?
I don't have a favorite book other than the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, that to me, I go on every Sunday night or Wednesday night to a men's big book study group, which is absolutely amazing. And I've learned the knowledge within that book, the blueprint that book lays out as to how and why, and the steps and the stories of other alcoholics and the founders of AA and how it all came to be. That to me is really my favorite book. It's sitting right here next to me as I speak. It doesn't go far from where I'm at. I mean, it's truly become such an important part of my recovery in my life today. Anything I need is in that book. So that's probably my favorite book.
Yes, the big book is definitely a favorite read. Number 4, what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
I think it's going again back to when I first asked you if you'd sponsor me. Funny enough, when you said you need to get rid of the girlfriend, you used different words than that. I won't share, but you basically said, get rid of the girlfriend. She's no good for you. And if I hadn't done that, she was an unhealthy person herself, and she was certainly unhealthy for me. I mean, go figure. I was dating someone before going to rehab, and I came back after rehab, and I continued to date someone who was in my life prior to that. And I had selected and picked her as a girlfriend for whatever reasons, and it certainly wasn't healthy reasons. So by getting rid of her, for me, was enough to allow me to start moving forward in my program. I remember even 3 months into my program, before I even asked you to sponsor me, I remember her at one point in time saying, you were a better person when you were using and drinking than you are today. And I just know that was fear for her. She was noticing I was much more involved with people in the program, and it took away time for she and I, and that was her way of trying to manage that fear, I think. But if I hadn't broken up with her, who's to say what I would have thought? Who's to say I would have said, oh, you know what, you're right, I need to spend more time with you versus less time with the program, with the people at the program. So that was crucial. I know that for me in early recovery, that was absolutely necessary, and I didn't have a relationship for, God, I think it was the first year and a half. It was certainly after my 4th step. So,
well, what's amazing is that you took that suggestion, and in retrospect, and after spending so many years in the program, you know how difficult that suggestion is. Telling a newcomer to either get out of a relationship or stay out of a relationship in the first year is like asking them not to eat.
Yeah.
It's seriously,
it really is
unbelievable.
You need that validation from somebody. You think you're getting love when it really isn't love most of the time. In my experience, that's what I've seen. That's what my experience was, is that it wasn't love. It was some sick acceptance that I was getting from somebody else. And the truth of the matter was that I needed to get into a relationship with the people in the program and in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous for me.
Absolutely. Okay, and then number 5, if you could give a newcomer only one suggestion, what would it be?
One suggestion. I'll try not to put a period in this one suggestion. Go to meetings, shut up and listen, get a sponsor, start working the steps, adopt the program, and attend meetings every day. Like we were just saying, don't get into a relationship until you've gotten through that 4th step. It's absolutely crucial. If you're not willing to do everything it takes, then you may not be ready, and that's okay. This program, again, I think I said earlier, is not for people who need the program. It's not people who want the program. It's for people who do the program. And unless you're willing to do the program, it's all for nothing in most cases. That's my experience. The people who come in, know they're beaten down, have that gift of desperation, and are willing to do the program are the people that succeed. They're the people you see every day. They're the people you see every year come around for an anniversary. And we are the fortunate ones, and that's the truth. I know that today. It's not because of me that I have 10 years today. It's because of God's grace. It's because of my willingness to surrender and accept God's will in my life. Again, I don't know why I was chosen to be one of the few that get this program, but I am, and I know I'm very grateful for that. And it's something I don't, take for granted.
Excellent. Great suggestion, Shane. And before we say goodbye, I have one more question for you. Mm-hmm. Of all the meetings you have attended anywhere in the world, which is your favorite group, and where is that group located?
I have 2 groups, the Vigilance group in Costa Rica and another group, an Alcoholics Anonymous group called the Zoo group in Escazú, San Jose as well.
Both are absolutely my favorite meetings. We both got sober and clean in those, and they saved our lives.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. We have reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then.